it's Miss Mariah here today with your fashionable fun day, and we're making scrunchies. Make sure you go and grab all of your supplies so we can get started. The first things that we're going to need are our fabric, our elastic, our shears, our thread, safety pins, and regular straight pins. Don't forget to also print out your pattern at home. You can download your pattern, print it out, and when we put it together, you want to make sure you're putting it edge to edge. So you're going to lay it flat, put it right next to each other, and then we're going to tape it. Then you can go ahead and cut out your pattern. Now on our pattern for our scrunchies, we have this little arrow here, and it says cut one on the fold. That means this part of your pattern needs to be touching the folded part of your fabric. So if you look at my scrunchie piece here, when I hold it next to my pattern, it looks like it's half the size. We cut it on the fold so it can be twice as long. You want to make sure your piece is long. If you have two small pieces, that's okay. You can sew them together in the middle so you have one long piece ready to go. For our elastic, we're using 1/4 inch elastic, and you want to use a 7.5 inch piece. I've got 2 pieces here for my scrunchies. We've got these big safety pins. We're going to be using these to help push our elastic through our scrunchie and also to help turn it all inside out. We've got our thread and our bobbin all ready to go, both our regular fabric shears and our pinking shears. And I've got my pins all set up and ready to go. We're going to go ahead and get ready to pin our project together. So I already have my piece pre-cut. I'm going to take my piece and I'm going to fold it in half like a hot dog, long ways. And as you see, I'm folding my piece right sides together. That means this is the right side, like the face of the fabric, and this is the back side, like the back of its head. When we put our fabrics together, we want to make sure they're touching face to face like this, smooching. So we're looking at the outside of our fabric right now, the back or wrong side. We're going to lay it flat, and then we're going to pin our piece together. So I have my piece nice and flat here, and you don't want to iron it. If you iron it, you're not going to have as fluffy as a scrunchie. We want to make sure we're just folding it. And we're going to start pinning 1.5 inches from the end. So that's about 3 fingers, or if you have small fingers, maybe 4. And we're going to put 1 pin right there. And we're going to make this pin an X. This is telling us that we don't want to sew all the way to the end. We're also going to do that when we get down to the end this way. So I'm laying it flat, and I'm going to pin about every 3 fingers. When we pin, we want to make sure we're going down and back up through both layers of our fabric. Skipping 3 fingers, going down and up. And you see I'm pinning so the pointy part of my pin is going towards the edge that I'm about to sew. So think of it as like the pin is going to point to where we're sewing. We like to pin this way at Fashion Camp because it makes it easier to take out your pins, and if you're still a beginner, you can actually sew over your pins until you start to get a little more used to it. A Fashion Camp tip for you: if you're new to pinning, you can pinch your fabric and push your pin through that way. Makes it a little bit easier if you're not used to going down and back up. Now remember, we're leaving an X 1.5 inches from this end as well, so we're not sewing all the way to the ends of our piece. So I have my X's telling me to stop and my pins, and now we're going to sew from X to X, right at the edge of our presser foot, or at about 3/8 on your machine. Now remembering, when you get close to your pins, you can stop and take them out, or if you're still learning, you can go right over them. Just be careful that your machine doesn't hit your pins. We're going to go ahead and start sewing our piece now. So now we're ready to start sewing our scrunchie. We're going to start at this X, lining up right at the edge of our presser foot, or at about 3/8. And we're going to start with our back stitch. I'm going to do about 5 stitches forward and 5 stitches back. And we're going to go right up to our first pin, and use the option. You can stop and take the pin out and keep going, or you can go right over your pins as well. Now remember, do not try to take the pins out while you're sewing. That is a little too dangerous. We want to make sure we're stopping and removing the pins or going over them. And I'm keeping it right at the edge of my presser foot. We're almost up to our X. And I'm going to do my back stitch now. So just a few forward and back to tie our knot at the end. I'm lifting up my presser foot to take out my piece, cutting my threads, and now we have it all sewed up. So now we've got our piece sewn together. We're going to remove our pins, putting them back in our little magnetic pin bowl. These are really, really handy that we use here at camp. And then I'm going to trim off my threads from where I was sewing. Make sure to get your threads from both sides. You don't want to leave any of these hanging on for later. Now I'm going to pink my edge, and you want to make sure when you're pinking to hold just barely the edge of the fabric. So we're going to pink just barely the edge of our fabric. And remembering that pinking is going to help your fabric to stop fraying. That means the little edges of the fabric you see here kind of falling off. It's unraveling our fabric. And when we pink it, you'll see here, no more unraveling. So that's why we want to pink our edges when we're done sewing. Just helps to preserve your fabric. So now I've got my piece sewn and pinked, and you see here my edges are open still. We still have about 1.5 inches from the end where they're open. Now I'm going to take one of my safety pins, I'm going to push it together and open it, and stick it through one layer of my end. And then I'm going to use this safety pin and push inside of the scrunchie to turn it inside out. With this trick, we're going to hold the back of the safety pin, so I'm holding right here but inside, and I'm going to scrunch up the fabric over the safety pin. And I'm kind of holding it with my fingers in the back. Now I'm going to hold on to the front of the safety pin right here inside and start pushing it. And we're going to keep going until we get out the other side of our scrunchie. You see, here's my piece. We're going to gently pull, and then voila, now it's turned inside out. I'm going to remove my safety pin, and then you can see we're ready for our next step. Now this part is a little confusing at first, so make sure you're watching. Our line right here in the center is where we sewed our piece, and you see our ends are open. What we're going to do is take it, we're going to flip it over so the sewed line is on the other side, and we're going to fold it in half. So I'm making sure my right sides are touching. They're smooching face to face, and we're unrolling those edges so it's nice and flat. So I have my two edges lined up flat. I'm going to pin it with my pins pointing outwards. We're going to pin a little closer than normal. We normally do about 3 fingers, but this is only about 3 fingers long. We have our piece pinned. Now it's looking like it's a whole circle. So we are going to go to the sewing machine and sew up this edge at the edge of our presser foot, and then we'll be ready for our elastic. Now we're ready to sew the end of our scrunchie at the edge of the presser foot, or 3/8 on your machine. We're going to start with our back stitch, and you see how I unrolled the ends and got my presser foot right down on that part. Removing my pins as I go. And really be careful of your fingers at these little parts. You want to make sure you're always keeping your hands off to the side and never in front or too close to your needle. We're pulling out our piece, trimming. Now we're ready to go back and insert our elastic. So I have the end of my scrunchie sewed. We sewed at the edge of our presser foot, and now we have a full circle. I'm going to go ahead and trim off those threads at each of my ends, remembering to get both sides. I'm going to pink my edge, very carefully getting just barely the ends there. And now we're ready to insert our elastic. So I have my 1/4 inch elastic. This is the skinny stuff, and we're going to use a 7.5 inch piece. Now I'm going to take my safety pins and put one safety pin on either side of my elastic. So I'm poking it through, closing, open this one, And just the same way that we use the safety pin to turn our scrunchie inside out, we're going to use that to put the elastic through the scrunchie. Now you want to make sure you clip one side of the safety pin with the elastic to your fabric. That way we're pulling through, it doesn't come out. It's going to kind of anchor it right here for us. So we're going to start putting our elastic inside of our scrunchie, and using that same technique, we're holding the back of our safety pin, scrunching up our fabric, and then gently pulling to pull the elastic through our scrunchie. We're going to keep going until we get out the other side, just like this. And now you see I have the one side I just pulled through, and then the one side that was clipped to my fabric. Now, very carefully, you want to unclip this side. And what you can do is pin it right to your other side of elastic. So now look, it's already looking kind of like a scrunchie. We need to close up this elastic because you don't want to have these safety pins inside of your scrunchie. Now there's a couple of different ways you can do it. We can sew it together, or we can tie it together. If we want to sew it, we're going to take both of our ends of our elastic and overlap them about 1/4 inch, or about the size of your finger. And then you would put a pin in it, and you could sew back and forth across the elastic to make sure it doesn't come apart. Or you can tie the two pieces. You might need help from mom and dad if you want to try the tying part, or even with the sewing part, just being really careful since it's such a small piece when you're sewing. So I'm going to take both my ends, I'm pulling out a bit of this elastic, and I'm wrapping it around 2 fingers and then tucking it under to make a little knot at the end. And we're going to pull the knot to the very end of our elastic, pulling from both sides to make sure it's nice and tight, it's not coming out. There we go. And now I can pull it into my scrunchie. So we're just about done. We just need to close up this hole here. You don't want this part sticking out. So we're going to pull, and we don't want to see the pinked edge. We don't want that sticking out because it's not the cutest thing. So we want to make sure that we're tucking it in. So you can take it and fold it over. You could go over to the iron if you have an iron out and iron it flat like that, or you can finger press it. So you see I'm just making a crease with my fingers here. I'm going to flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. I'm pushing down about 1/4 inch, a little crease here. And now when I put my two edges together, it's going to look a lot cleaner. See this nice clean folded in edge? We're going to close up this hole with our pins. So we're going to find the beginning of the hole right here and put a pin so we know where it starts. And then keeping those edges lined up and folded so it looks nice, we're going to continue to pin. And since this is a small part, we're going to put our pins a little closer, maybe every 2 fingers. Pulling. You're going to have to sort of pull to get to your next side. And you want to try to line up your seams. That's always an important part of sewing, is lining everything up. So I have my line right here, my seam line, where we had sewed our circle together. And on both sides, I want to make sure I've got that line nice and lined up. It's a good thing to get in the habit of, even if this is just for a scrunchie. We're going to continue pinning our hole closed. And you see how I'm pulling it flat with my fingers as I go? That's also going to help us when we're sewing it. We want it to be as flat as we can get it while we're sewing. I'm going to mark the very end of our hole so we know where to begin and end. So I've got all my pins in it. I'm going to pull it out so you can see. We're going to sew straight across, and we're going to sew it at the edge of the presser foot, but we'll be moving our needle over so we can get as close to this edge as possible. You could also hand sew this closed. Using your hand sewing stitches, you could do a slip stitch and sew either side closed, or you could do a little whip stitch if you wanted to see your threads. We're going to go ahead and sew it now. So now we're ready to sew the edge of our scrunchie together. What I'm going to do is pull it flat and get it lined up right at my first pin, right at the edge of my presser foot. And I'm going to be moving my needle over to the right side, so I'm really nice and close. On my machine, we're going to change the stitch width. So where the little zigzag shape is on my machine, I'm going to scroll over there and move all the way to the side. Your machine might be a little bit different, but you can find some of the knobs to move your needle over. If you can't figure out how to move your needle over, you can always just line it up close to the edge. So I've reset my machine so you can see. You could just set it like that and use your hand wheel to put the needle down to see how close you are to that edge. I'm going to line mine up at the edge of the presser foot since it makes it a little bit easier to keep it straight. I've moved my needle over, and we're going to start by sewing just a little bit at a time. We're going to go like every 3 pins, and then we're going to go ahead and stop and pull the rest of our scrunchie out. So I'm doing my back stitching, getting up to this first pin, and I'm going to stop now and sort of pull my scrunchie flat, making sure to keep those fingers out of the way. If you're having trouble getting over the parts, you can gently pull it. But make sure not to pull hard because that'll mess up your stitches. It changes the length of them and we don't want that. We're almost to the end. I've got my last pin here. And make sure to do your back stitch. You want to tie that knot when you get to the end. We're all done sewing. We're going to take it out, pull our threads, and we'll go trim everything off. So now we've finished sewing up that hole. We're nice and close to the edge. Make sure to trim off those threads from both sides. Check and see if there's any other little threads hanging out that you might have missed. And voila, our scrunchie is done. Now it's time for our scrunchie party. All right, guys, I hope you had fun. I can't wait to see all of your scrunchies. Make sure you post them, tag us at Fashion Camp. We love to see all the things that you guys are making. I'll see you next time. Bye.